Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore Uranus station in direct on January the 22nd at 10:59 p.m. Universal Central Time. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for joining me once more. If you're new to my channel, it's great to have you with me. Please feel very welcome to comment. I do interact with all comments. This is very much a community. And also, if you'd like to like or subscribe, that would be fab too. Now, what I'm going to do is just outline how I'm going to structure this video. What is Uranus? What influence does this planet have? What's the zodiac sign that it governs? Where is it less productive? There's a bit of a clue there. It is Taurus, where it's been. Also, in terms of the symbolism, what does Uranus represent? The myth. I'm also going to explain to you when the Uranus retrograde began, but it wasn't just that event on August the 24th. It was the pre-shadow period that began on the 7th of May. What does that mean? It doesn't come out of the post-retrograde shadow until the 9th of May 2023. What are the implications? And what were the influences that Uranus made within its retrograde that were really powerful? Now that is very, very important to look at, especially in terms of that total lunar eclipse of the 8th of November last year, and of course the fact that Uranus and Saturn have been caught up in a very abrasive right angle, the two rulers of Aquarius, for the last 2 years. But also, what does Uranus retrograde feel like, and how are we going to feel different from January the 22nd future forwards? How can this ease or otherwise our situations? And then finally, I'm going to give you your zodiac sign forecast from Aries through to Pisces and explain how it's going to feel until Uranus begins its next retrograde, which will be on August the 29th, 2023. Now, if you would like to understand what year 2023 will hold for you individually, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place of birth, I can give you your forecast, but in my special package, your life roadmap. This helps you to understand where you can really shine, but also where you may have experienced repetitive challenges in your life, and getting a more intimate understanding of these influences in your nativity will help you to do much better future forwards. There's 30% off in my special package, and within this you can get your zodiac forecast for the year, your Vedic forecast and Chinese forecast. Remember, we have the Chinese year of the rabbit fast approaching. It's actually on the same day as Uranus going direct, and all of those are free. Please see the link beneath this video. So let's first of all briefly explore what Uranus is about. So Uranus is the co-ruler or the co-regent of the sign of Aquarius, which is very much about the collective, but also future planning. It can be about where we network. Now, the traditional ruler, of course, is Saturn, the steady Eddy of the zodiac. So they have a very different characteristic because Uranus is restless, innovative, is provocative. And so the fact that the two of them have been in a broad right angle for 2 years, the last time exactly was in December 21, but they came within 1 minute of being exactly square in the first week of October 2022, means that you've got two influences which coexist in Aquarius, but actually at a 90-degree angle have really been in a very abrasive relationship. And when you read about the sun sign archetype of astrology, often it is based on Uranus, that Aquarians are a bit quirky, maybe a bit changeable, like space, can be very original in their thinking, and that's all true. But there is a duality because Aquarius energy also appreciates continuity because it's a fixed sign. So there can be long-standing friendships with Aquarius people. They have ideals which are very important to them. Now, because Uranus has been existing in the sign of Taurus since 2018 for those 5 months, and since March 2019 till now, that's also a fixed sign. So over the last couple of years, these two rulers, rather than coexisting, have actually been on pretty bad terms. And one of the reasons for that is that Uranus is technically in full in the sign of Taurus, F-A-L-L. It's because it's exalted in the sign of Scorpio, and it's also in detriment in the sign of Leo. But what's the clue there? Yes, they're all fixed signs. Fixed signs generally prefer continuity, the status quo, don't really like change that much, can resist it. So that's the paradox of the sign of Aquarius, with Saturn and Uranus coexisting. But that's Saturnian energy. It's very important, especially if people are born in the first 10 degrees of Aquarius. The second 10 degrees are governed in exaltation by Mercury, and the last 10 degrees decan is Venus. But that first 10 degrees is the duality of Saturn and Uranus. So the last couple of years, they've been in that right angle, but the last time they were exactly square was in December 21, but they came within 1 minute of being square in the first week of October 2022. But within 3 degrees, which is a very tight orb, they have been in a square for much of that last 24 months. So Uranus in the sign of Taurus, not at its best. And the last time it was there was when the Second World War started. And it actually moved into the sign of Taurus in the mid-1930s. So Uranus can be about our self-worth. It can be about everyday money. It can be about land. And obviously Uranus pushes us to be experimental. And Taurus is probably the least receptive to experimentation of all the zodiac signs, because the moon is exalted in Taurus, and that gives you a clue. Taurans feel comfortable, feeling safe. So Uranus is a very provocative, shocking influence. So over the last couple of years, part of us has been pushed to change our approach to our use of resources, and another part of us wants to embrace maybe the higher principles of Aquarius, which is trying to connect to others in a fair-minded way, whereas others have perhaps been, in a very reckless way, using their resources much more for their personal gain. That's one of the impacts. The other thing that we've seen is that people have become more dissatisfied with the status quo, which fixed signs like. And Uranus, therefore, has made people much more militant and much more impulsive about expressing their dissatisfaction. And because Saturn also rules the sign of Capricorn, it's very much about how things have been over a long period of time. Big institutions, big government, big companies, but in Aquarius, of course, much more progressive influence, because it's an air sign and it's how we think, whereas Capricorn is an earth sign and it's very much about the physical realm. So business, property, finance, and so on. But Uranus is a very electric energy and, of course, can be very disruptive. So one part of our situation has been pushing us to change and do something different, and the other part has been resisting that change and trying to hold on to what we know. And that's created quite a lot of agitation, and I feel that agitation has been a lot worse since Uranus went retrograde, which was on August the 24th. But it began its pre-shadow period on the 7th of May. It emerges from that post-shadow period on the 9th of May. So you can see in total its impact lasts a year. It actually goes through the retrograde each year between about 150 and 155 days and reverses within that time by 4 degrees. So that's really important to know. But also, what was going on when the retrograde actually began? Because this is really important. We can look at influences in isolation, and people do that, but it's important to think, well, on August the 24th, where was Uranus and what was its relationship then? Well, in fact, it was in a conjunction with the North Node, but it was squaring Saturn within a couple of degrees, but critically, those two sets of influences, Uranus and the North Node, and Saturn, were T-squared by Venus. So Venus was in Leo, guess what? Another fixed sign. But Venus, of course, governs money, but also relationships. And the sign of Taurus is ruled by Venus, and therefore we have the money. So we've seen a lot of disruption around money. Then if we think back to that total lunar eclipse of the 8th of November, that also was involved in Uranus in the sign of Taurus, which is where the eclipse occurred, but the sign of Scorpio, where the sun was hosting, that's to do with longer term finance. But guess what? That was also T-squared by Saturn. So we've seen a lot of repressed energies boiling into the open as people have felt very dissatisfied with any injustices, which the sign of Uranus is very much into supporting. But also Uranus is about the truth, the higher truth, which is also represented by the sign of Aquarius. So Taurus can be very pragmatic. It's very much about making sure we balance the books with our everyday finance. But those two energies in that abrasive right angle with Venus in the mix as well suggest that there has been relationship issues, not just issues to do with the economy. So if you felt very tense around a relationship where you felt confined, or you feel that you can't have your voice or your truth, or you can express it, but then you've been rejected by people because you're not necessarily supporting what they think is right, then there may have been a level of exclusion, because Uranus can lead to people feeling isolated. So if you have Uranus opposite your moon or square your moon, or you have it conjunct Pluto, that's very, very rebellious, that aspect. It can mean that you can find yourself out in the cold because people resent the honesty that sometimes you can convey. What is it Plato said? If you're truthful, you will be hated. And I think Uranus represents that higher truth. So if you have felt on edge, found it difficult to sleep, found it difficult to relax, all of that, I feel, has really been a factor since August the 24th. And it won't be until May the 9th that we feel the unravelling of this particular Uranus retrograde season. Now, 40% of people are actually born with Uranus retrograde in their natal horoscope. So how does the Uranus retrograde each year affect them? Well, it just depends what influences are connecting to that position of Uranus in their natal charts. If there are disruptive or supporting influences, that would give you the clue. So on the screen now, I'm sharing the solar event chart for when Uranus goes direct. And you can see there it is at 14 degrees 56 minutes. Now, the great takeout from this is that if we look where Saturn is, it's in Aquarius, which obviously it rules. It's going to leave, of course, on March the 7th and won't be back for 27 years in the sign of Aquarius. But the gap between Saturn and Uranus is 10 degrees. Now that's really quite wide, but some astrologers will use a 10-degree orb on some inner planets. So the luminaries like the sun and the moon, if they're connecting with really serious players. Personally, I like to keep orbs in my natal analysis with clients much tighter, so it keeps things much more precise. But the irony is that right at the end of Uranus's retrograde, they've stretched out to the point where their influence is much more benign. But there's a double irony here, because you can see there's a whole raft of planets in the sign of Aquarius. The sun, 2 degrees 39. The moon, 1814. So the moon and Uranus are in a square. Of course, Uranus governs the sign co-regent of Aquarius. But we also have Saturn still there. So still a very Aquarian vibe to all of this. But if we take the midpoint between the moon, the receptive energies we all have, and the sun, the assertive energies we have, it's actually at 10 degrees in Aquarius. And that midpoint position is in a square with Uranus, within a few degrees. Also, you can see that Saturn may no longer be in a tight square with Uranus, but it is in a pretty well exact conjunction within 2 minutes with Venus. So Venus, of course, is the ruler of Taurus. So we've got some receptivities going on here. And I feel that this chart is essentially saying that the collective reset that we're all going through in terms of thinking about how we use our resources. So it's not just that resources have become more expensive, it's actually pushing us to think about what this does if we use those resources beyond the physical cost to our bank balance. So in other words, how much of those energies are we consuming? So there is an opportunity to reform our behavior, which is very Aquarius and of course very Uranian. No one wants anyone to be cold and no one wants anyone to be hungry. If they do, there's something seriously wrong. But you can see that the collective shift we're all going through about appreciating what we have much more, not just taking material consumption for granted, that is going to continue apace. And of course, Saturn oppressing Venus, potentially, suggests that we've all got to be pretty thrifty about our resources, but we can also share what we have with others, very Aquarian, the community. So there are things that we can gain. The ascendant, the proper ascendant for the event is 11 degrees Libra, and that's actually forging a beautiful trine with the midpoint. So there is an opportunity to think about how we interact with one another, how we show our feelings to one another. And the sign of Aquarius, very much heralded by the energy of Uranus, is very much about the higher principles, going beyond the physical domain and really seeing where there are connections that are sometimes beyond our comprehension in some respects, but they're very important. Like if someone says something such as a politician and they're actually really honest about a mistake, that actually has an impact on us all. The energy and the reaction within us, we realise the authenticity of that. And when people are not honest and they're ducking and they're diving and it's all about tax evasion and so forth and so on, we also feel that too. So we feel that energy even though we may not physically be able to see it. And I think there's going to be more of that ongoing. Funnily enough, in terms of healing, you can see that Chiron in the first solar house in Aries is actually in a beautiful sextile to the midpoint. The midpoint is extremely important. I did see one other very well-known YouTube astrologer say, oh, I don't go into all that midpoint stuff. It's all way too complex. What's the point of that? Okay, that tells me something about their approach to astrology, because with my clients, particularly if their moon and the sun is not in the same sign, it often gives people a real clarity around their identity once I reveal the sun moon midpoint to them. The other thing just to say is Mars, of course, has just gone direct on the 12th, but it is still in that quincunx with Mercury. So Mercury in Capricorn is very much about marshalling our resources in a very sensible, reliable, systematic way, very steady Eddie, Saturn orientated position for Mercury, very businesslike. But Mars in Gemini wants to go with things very quickly. It's about articulating ideas or actually physically moving quickly. And I think it's not the best of times to rush things around resources, therefore, even if we have a new idea that we think is absolutely brilliant. So I hope that gives you a flavour of what Saturn squaring Uranus has meant over the last couple of years. What Uranus in its retrograde has done, probably made us feel more tetchy, more penned in, especially if you've had COVID restrictions in your particular area. Think of how the citizens of China felt until that was eased. around about the turn of the year. Okay, there's been implications from that easing, but there's also implications that there weren't more gradual easings in the interim. And so that has an outcome. And also that Uranus going direct will, I feel, make us feel less agitated, but we've still got to work at evolving our approach to resources, money, employment, how we connect to one another, looking for truth, because there's so much poisonous sentiment that's exchanged online, so much polarized opinion rather than discussion which benefits us all. So seeing the big picture. So those are the wonderful qualities of Aquarius at its very best, when we get the energy of stability of Saturn working in that collegiate way with Uranus, which also asks us to be open-minded, progressive, and seeking out new ways to do things, new fresh ways to do things. I'm now going to give you each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you an idea of what you can expect through to the next retrograde. So Aries, if your options around your resources have felt somewhat stymied and limited, or people have been pushing you to reevaluate some of your core values, or even you felt that people have been quite pointed about your very identity, who you represent, then that's probably been quite painful at times. I think it's possible that someone or some people have made way in your friendship group. But if you have got any friends as you go into this direct period of Uranus that have stood by you and do understand some of the complexities of your situation, they're likely to be citizens who will stick around for quite some time. Now, Taurus, for you, Uranus has been a really revolutionising influence, and as I mentioned before, it began in 2018. Of course, it depends on exactly where you have the Sun or other inner planets. Anywhere up to 15 degrees, the impact has been immense. Anything beyond 15 degrees, it may have been more of a psychological restlessness that you've been experiencing. But of course, Saturn has been in your sector of work and obligation, where you have to fulfill duties, perhaps in terms of your professional situation, perhaps in terms of helping older people in your family and so forth. So I feel that what's happened over the last few years is that there's been quite a big shake-up in your world. Some kind of move or movement has gone on in your situation. It's either been a physical move or an inner movement, and there may have been both. And part of the reason it's been so strong for you is the collective that's been evolving in the sign of Capricorn, which is the 9th house, very much about experimentation, trying new things, being more open to international travel, connections with people at a distance, higher values, education, new information and knowledge. But also, if you're someone who has had some very set routines, the chances are if you're born in that first half of Taurus, some of those really have been challenged. And some of it may not have been very easy. So, for example, it may have been a boss who's asked you to do something very different, or perhaps you've gone into an arena which is very different to one you've worked in before. Perhaps you've been able to port across skills and experiences in the past, but it has been fresh, and that's probably been stressful at times. But you really have not had much of an option to not change. It really has been quite a compelling time for you. But if you've embraced it and gone with it and gone with the energy of Pluto in your 9th house, you may have gone through a huge explosion of new experiences, which has proved to be enormously exciting for you. Now, Gemini, I think of all the zodiac signs, I feel Uranus has been the most difficult for Gemini people the last couple of years. Again, it depends on where your sun is in Gemini, or perhaps your ascendant, but the position of Uranus in the 12th house has been challenging that side of you that's airy, quick-witted, funny, amusing, flexible, flitty, the ability to get along with lots of different types of people, but Uranus keeps reminding you of the need to look within. And of course, Uranus is an electric energy, so therefore it's your nervous system and stress, which I feel may have been very intimate partners with you over the last few years, if you've not been able to integrate the side of your nature that you may feel less comfortable with. So, for example, if you know anything that you're fearful about, or where you have great amounts of pride, or you want to present a very competent persona, but there's other parts of you that are not quite as intact, those kind of situations could have been quite challenging. And of course, Saturn's very much about limitation and boundaries, but the ninth house where it's been is about expansion. So any tensions and weariness and exhaustion you felt has been amplified in some kind of way. So I think if you're working at embracing the shadow side of your nature, of becoming more comfortable with your fears, of sitting more with past events that were turbulent and upsetting, you can't necessarily change them, but you can change your relationship to them. And I think Uranus, because of the truth of it, can be a force for good. So that's going to get easier for you from here on in, I feel. Now, Cancer, for you, Uranus has been in house 11. This is really interesting because your sign is a cardinal sign, and you do like to be in charge, but you may not articulate it in a particularly obvious way. But it's more of an atmospheric thing with you. Your immediate environment has to feel safe and comfortable. But I feel Uranus has been pushing you to be much more radical in your approach, to challenge some things about yourself that in the past you wouldn't have dreamed you'd done. So that may have seen you adopting some fresh ideas, or mixing with people who in the past may have seemed a little bit left field for you, but actually you've been finding it really like a breath of fresh air. So, but your future direction in life may have continually felt like it needed to change, but Saturn in your 8th house may have left you feeling that you didn't have the financial wherewithal to drive some of your idealism. And because your nature does like to play safe, but also feel in control, and there's been so much energy in your 7th house of relationships, it's not necessarily been easy for you to embrace the gush of energy that Uranus can bring. So I feel with it going direct now, it's more of the same. Keep experimenting, maybe attend events which are with people who you wouldn't necessarily have spent time with before, because you will find them very stimulating, but you will possibly also still find them challenging. But I think your longer term future remains very fluid, even though the sign of Taurus prefers something to be very set. But I think it is going to keep changing, and the more you resist the change, the more uncomfortable it could feel. Leo, of course, for you, Uranus is in your sector of work, professional obligations, and how you connect to the wider world, because you've had so much energy in house 6, which is asking you to be dutiful, focusing on the needs of others, being very supportive, not necessarily had an enormous amount of physical vitality. And then Saturn in your sector of relating has meant that even if you've wanted to try something different professionally, maybe someone close to you has felt fearful that that would perhaps influence your the previous income that you had, or has wanted you to continue to play that role as the supporter. Now, this is all very un-Leo, because, of course, your sign is about shining in the sunlight, receiving the acclamation and the praise. But I feel it's possible that over the last 2 years, you have pushed yourself to do something really different, which has put you in the spotlight. It just may have made it a bit uncomfortable around certain involvements, especially the person or the people who doesn't necessarily want you to go off piste and do your own thing. They want you to be there of service to them. So that may have been the dilemma. So things at work and how you connect with the wider world will keep changing, and the more open you are to the radical process, the more you will gain. Now, Virgo, I think Uranus Retrograde for you has been quite tough, because the 9th house is where we really want to do things in a very spontaneous way. We want to break out. We want to travel further distances. We want to spend time with people who are very, very different to us. But that side of you that just, it's so programmed into you. It's really part of your celestial DNA, which is to, go or provide processes which are efficient and workable and tangible, which help others. But there's another part of you that's got really cheesed off with those said processes. So there's been an element of conflict going on within you between what you try different and new and about what you should stay around being dutiful with. But of course the collective in Capricorn has been pushing you to be much more expressive about your true talent. So continue to do that, but I feel that you will bring into your life more novel approaches and more fresher things over the next few years until Uranus makes its way into Gemini. And I think that this could be just different types of holiday destinations, different hobbies, learning a foreign language, being much more interested in technology or publishing. So that gives you some clues of where you can shine. Libra, for you, Uranus house 8. Now, of course, Uranus is the exalted in its essential dignities in Scorpio, which is an 8th house influence. So anything to do with deep work you've been doing, sort of psychology, reading about the psyche, perhaps having counselling, understanding much more about what really makes you tick. All of that stuff, if you've really been up for it, has worked really well. The thing is, of course, that Saturn has been in the 5th house, which is to do with expressing our joys. Saturn and joy, we don't often hear that. But if you've got creative talents, Saturn's been encouraging you to work hard at refining them and being very self-disciplined. But in the 5-8 square that's gone on for much of the last couple of years, and of course this retrograde to a degree in October, certainly 2021, and right up to the end of the first week of December, within 3 degrees, I feel that somehow or another you've had to really be conscious of the financial side of things, and I think that side of life has probably been very unpredictable, and I think there's been a lot of costs, and I think it's been a bit of a bumpy ride. But remember, Uranus also opens us up to new ways of looking at things, and also in the 8th house, delving beneath the surface. So that means really understanding the machinations that go on in any situation much more, and that journey will continue, but now you're much more briefed up on all the nuances within it. Scorpio, for you, Uranus is in house 7. This is where we compete. This is where we interact with people that we don't necessarily find easy, our known rivals, or in traditional astrology, known enemies. But also it's where we relate. But the 7th house is, of course, about partnerships. So if you found that your love life has been very restless through this retrograde, or you felt, not necessarily like breaking out of the relationship, but just felt really, rather closed in, it wouldn't be a surprise if we think that when Uranus went retrograde, it was on 3 points in a T-square in every fixed sign other than yours. So depending on exactly where your sun is, you may have actually, if your sun's around about 15 degrees, 18 degrees, you would have got that full blast. So I think that with Saturn being in the 4th house, and also Saturn obviously was retrograde until later in October, it may have been a tough old time for certain relationships, but your modern ruler, Pluto, has been asking you to think afresh around certain ideas and how you interact with people immediately around you. But I think relationships have led to some shock confrontations, people being hugely outspoken in a very unfair, brutal way at times. I don't think it's been very easy. But you, of course, can be very frank yourself, and you may, I don't mean this unkindly, but you may have experienced a little bit how you have been to others in the past, in the sense that you yourself can be quite private about your own personal situation and affairs, but your observations on others can be really quite jagged and to the point. And I think you may have been on the end of a little bit of that yourself. But now going forwards, perhaps what you've learned with Uranus retrograde in the 7th house is that it's important in couples to have a bit of space, but it's also important to have truth. And if you're giving each other a bit of space, but you're also being very authentic with one another, the relationship has and will continue to grow. Which brings us to Sagittarius. Uranus has been in house 6. If your physical health has felt really quite wretched at times since August, you've really felt exhausted, or it's gone back over the last couple of years, then I think Uranus's square with Saturn has definitely been part of it, because the 3rd house is the nervous system, Gemini, and the 6th house is our physical health, and obviously Virgo. So, and Uranus affects in a very electric way our bodies. So I feel also that you felt quite overwhelmed at times. It's been difficult for you to prioritise and just, shrink things down to what's really essential. So that's, I think, what you've learned. You've got to make a list, decide on what's really essential at the top of the list, and if you don't get to the bottom of the list, it doesn't matter. Just be as efficient as possible in the available energy you've got, and that will work well for you. But changes around what you do for a living or your daily structure just seem to be the norm at the moment, so continue to expect that change to come about. You can deal with that because you're a mutable sign, and also because you've got a pretty low attention span, as most zodiac signs go. So new experiences are something that you're always up for, but it may be around your work or about obligations to others that there needs to be some changes. Capricorn, Uranus for you, house 5. House 5 is wonderful. It's about passion, it's about love, romance, our relationship with our kids if we have them. Can also be where we shine artistically or creatively or musically or socially, and you can be very sociable. Of course, every single person is not a sum of their zodiac sign. They're a sum of all their different parts of their nativity. And often Capricorn people can be reserved when they're younger and become much more outgoing as time goes on. And of course, if you're born in the 2nd decan of Capricorn, well, Venus is your ruler. So that's beautiful. It's very sensual, loves the good things in life. If you are in the last 10 degrees, you're someone with great precision, with Mercury being the ruler of that last 10 degrees. But if you're in the first 10 degrees, Saturn has been affecting your sense of self-worth, but also your resources. But I think it's that middle section that's really taken the rap since this retrograde in Uranus began. And of course, that's Venus. So maybe money has been a bit tight. But also, the 2nd, 5th house energy is almost what we're all collectively going through, that we just got to get much more conscious about not just splashing cash out randomly and spontaneously. We need to be a bit thriftier. But if you're someone who does enjoy the good things in life and a bit of luxury and going away for, a weekend to a nice spa or your foreign holidays or whatever, maybe you've had to trim your expenditure down a bit, and maybe that has felt quite limiting. But also maybe you felt a bit quieter, and if your social life hasn't been very stimulating, I think this is for all Capricorns, a bit bored at times. But what are the new hobbies that you can develop just for yourself? Do you have to connect with other people? So that's the question Uranus is asking you from henceforth. Aquarius now, blimey O'Reilly. So I've got Venus and the Moon and also Chiron, 10, 12, 13 degrees. So this Saturn position has been squaring with Uranus. So what's been happening? Uranus in the 4th house of home. So we moved, and then we were moving again twice, but we decided to stay where we are. But there's been a lot of sort of coming to terms with the new space we're in. It's a very different property from before, which was quite, it was a bit TARDIS-like, but it did have a lot of space. And this one has space, but in a different way. So we've had to adapt to that. And also that inner stuff of finding it more difficult to get to sleep because feeling wired up. So Aquarius people, again, it depends on where you are. If you're anything from 0 degrees through to the middle of the sign, you've probably felt Uranus is retrograde much more keenly. But Uranus, of course, in the 4th house means that there may have been some erratic energies in the family. You may have separated yourself from people that you have blood connections with because you don't feel there's a truthfulness around those relationships. Then again, they may have separated themselves from you. You may have actually downsized the house because people have left home and you don't need as much space, or you may have tried to do what we've done, moved all together because you want a completely new environment, which is what Uranus is about. But it's all about searching for that inner truth that meets all of our individual expectations. I think Uranus going forwards suggests that things can calm a little bit on the home and domestic front, and maybe the separations that needed to happen have happened, to be honest. There may still be some contact, but really you're only wanting people at the core of your life who really are truthful and really 100% in your corner. Pisces. Now, I think that this square between Uranus and Saturn has actually been really awkward for you in a similar way to Gemini's, and it's strange that you're both immutable. The reason is, of course, is that Uranus in the 3rd house can be brilliant for getting fitter, high intensity training, dashing around, engaging in new skills, technology. You may have been inspired around all those areas, but Saturn's in your 12th house, very much about endings, the psychology of situation. 12th, 3rd can be gossip. So the world we live in now, there's all that energy crackling away, trying to get our attention, and it can drain us enormously. So if there has been times when you felt really, really sort of run down, it wouldn't be a surprise. But there's been other times when I think you've been showing huge ingenuity. It's just the emotional plane, which Saturn has been really asking you to take a look at, has meant that when you're not working or you're not doing something that's really enjoyable to you, you've probably needed to rest. But I think that Uranus going forwards is good. Mars going forwards suggests that anything that's stalled around changing where you live in a physical way, that's going to resolve itself. Obviously on this event, Mercury is still in a quincunx with Mars, so maybe there's still some information that you need to get. So connections to people who can help you with that will be important going forwards from this moment. But if you do want to feel less frazzled, anything to do with meditation and relaxing with a massage or a spa treatment or swimming, anything very soothing will be very good for you, preparing you for when Saturn enters your sign on the 7th of March. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Please interact with me, comment, like, subscribe. It'd be much appreciated. Take care for now.